about how, we talked about how people interface, right? Well, people don't touch each other very often, except to prove that they're not carrying a gun or a knife, which is where handshaking came from, right? But we do look at each other, we listen to each other, and we talk to each other. So to me, the natural human interface to devices is going to follow the more natural human interface between people. That would mean face and voice, right?
Yeah, right.
I suspect that's where it's all going to end up.
Hello and welcome to our latest episode here from SCY Studios. My name is Jeff Slagle and I'm the President and Chief Business Development Officer at Scitalis. And we're really thrilled that you stopped by. We have a fantastic video for you today, a fantastic guest that we're bringing on the show. His name is Meyer, and Jay is one of the executives at FaceTec and is a very well-respected member of the biometrics community and someone that I've had the good fortune of calling friend now for the last several years. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Jay. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming in and spending some time with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. It's interesting you use the word fantastic because I'd like to just point out that you just won a pretty prestigious award, the Insights Merit Award, and congratulations for that, my friend. That's not something they give out to anybody, just anybody in the identity management industry.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I do have to, and not for this to sound like false humility. There really were many more deserving people of that, most notably the gentleman who actually recommended me for that. It really should have gone to him. But I thank you for the comment, and certainly it's something that I'm very passionate about. I really believe, in the value of standardization, and the standardization that has taken place around biometrics has been hugely important to a wider spread adoption and implementation of biometric technology. But for the benefit maybe of some of our viewers that are not that familiar with what biometrics are, I can't think of anybody better to kind of give an overview than someone who actually helps lead one of the world's top biometrics companies.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. If you'd like, I can introduce myself a little bit, just in case people don't know me. I am, again, Jay Meyer. I am the Senior Vice President of North American Operations for a technology vendor called FaceTec. FaceTec is a 3D face matching and liveness detection provider. I also run a consulting practice called Sage Capital Advisors, and Sage consults to companies, usually startup related companies in the biometrics, cryptography, and smart card industries, and also the broader identity management industry. There's a finance spin on that because prior to that I was an economist and securities analyst in investment banking. And my focal point in that practice was identity management, and more specifically biometrics, cryptography, and smart cards. In 2006, I wrote a book about this stuff, and if you read it, you and my mom were the only two. But, it was useful in a lot of ways, and it helped me launch my consulting practice. So I'm very glad to be here. I've been doing this a long time, and I have to say it's a very exciting time in the industry. Those of us that have been around for decades have been patiently waiting for the emergence of architectures and technologies that actually make sense in identity management, and it seems that we are there today.
Right.
So
Well, we talk quite a, yeah, it is exciting, and we talk quite a bit about identity here at SCY Studios, and we've had guests on to talk about different kinds of identity management programs and systems and schemes that are becoming more and more commonplace around the world. Biometrics is one of those things that I think the average person maybe doesn't appreciate and maybe doesn't understand as well as they need to. And I mean that they need to appreciate what biometrics are and what biometrics actually do. And so I think as we move forward in our conversation, if you just want to take a minute to kind of describe what exactly biometrics really are.
Sure. So biometrics are a way of identifying and authenticating people. We have our identities, which are represented out to the world in a number of different ways. Historically, people have interacted with one another by seeing each other, listening to each other, and talking to one another, right? And we recognize each other in certain ways, and that recognition tends to reduce risk. Okay, so our relationship is less risky if you recognize me and I recognize you as friendly or foe. I could behave accordingly, right? And we do that based on physiological attributes of our bodies, and so biometrics are the measurement of those physiological attributes, and there's a wide variety of them. And those measurements are used to identify somebody. If we do not know who the subject is, we can compare their biometric attributes to potentially a database of other biometric attributes to see if they match. That's called identification. If they do match, we know that Jay is this guy in the database, right? Biometrics are also used for authentication. And authentication is more about confirming that you are who you say you are, right? Every day we are all given privileges, and we all exercise these privileges to get through a doorway, to use a smartphone, to use a computer, to log on to a network, domain, any number of things. Driving a car is a privilege. And we use biometrics to confirm that I am the person, in fact, that has been given that privilege and has the opportunity to utilize that privilege, right? And since privileges are valuable, people try and steal them, and people try and destroy them. And so it's important that we keep the appropriate people with access to those privileges, and we eliminate inappropriate people and their access to those privileges.
Yeah.
Make sense?
No, it makes total sense. Makes total sense. Now, as you were talking through that, something occurred to me though, and that is we may find ourselves in trouble if, for example, if bringing this back around in context to how biometrics works in sort of the electronic identity space, there's so much emphasis right now on these electronic IDs that people are using, or digital IDs that people are using, and a lot of that has to do with I'm carrying around this thing that I can't see on a device, and I am now able to use it. But it's fairly obvious to me, and it probably is quite obvious to you, that how does anybody know that it's me on the other side using that ID if all that really is involved is possession of the device? That would seem to me to be kind of a fatal flaw in any approaches where, it's digital, it's an electronic ID, but the reality is, do you really, you said it, the aim is to kind of know who you're dealing with. Do you really know who you're dealing with if you're not doing some kind of a biometric something or other? Do you want to talk to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Since the internet was invented, we have been granting people privileges on the internet and in network situations, right? And since we don't actually exist inside of the digital world, we have to interface to the digital world through some type of a device, your laptop, your desktop computer, your smartphone, right? Those are devices that we use to gain access to these privileges in the internet, and which there's several different varieties, but let's just use gaining access to a website or gaining access to certain data that is not public, right? And so traditionally we've authenticated devices to one another using various technologies. So for example, when you are traveling in your car in between cell coverage areas, right? And you drop coverage in one cell area and you pick up coverage in the next. Well, the next might be owned by a different company that wants to know that the new person traveling into their cell area actually has the privilege of using their cell phone in that area, right?
Right.
And so we use technology to ensure that their devices, their network server, whatever else, recognize this device as eligible to be used in that cell. Same thing with a network, right? I log on to a computer, I log on to a website. Our devices communicate with one another and make sure that they understand that this is a recognized device and it's safe to move data between the two, right? It's safe to allow somebody on this device to see the data or to access the privileges that people have been granted. Well, the problem is, and as you pointed out, that there's a major vulnerability that we don't know who's actually using the device, right?
Right.
And if you trust the device authentication, public key infrastructure, some other type of cryptographic application, if you trust that connection too much and trust the relationship between the user and the device too much, then you may be granting access to an unauthorized user to that data or that subscription or privilege or whatever it is, right? And in fact, according to large industry surveys that have been going on for decades, poor user authentication is the primary vector for data breaches globally. It's not even close. It's something like 85% of all data breaches are performed by exploiting weak user credentials, right? The fact that we don't know who's actually holding this device. And if you think about it, that means that these devices are really good at connecting to each other and keeping the interaction safe. The perimeter of the network or the database is safe. It's the door that we're leaving wide open. It's the door that allows people to get in and steal whatever they want. So it's the connection between the device and the user that is weak, that allows these breaches and allows these identity thefts. And we see it every day. I mean, during the pandemic, the last tally I saw was that identity thieves have stolen something like $70 billion from government by representing themselves as someone they are not, so that they can get access to the pandemic relief funds, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. The government does not know who is holding the device. So using a biometric in that case, there's lots of ways that we try to authenticate the user. Most of them just aren't very good. The fact is that most of them are at least 1 degree separated from the actual user. A password, for example. If someone else can use this authenticator to represent themselves as me, that authenticator is 1 degree separated from me. So a password, a token, a dongle of some type, right? Some type of device that you plug into your computer, whatever it is. If I can hand that to somebody, if somebody can steal it and use it, it's not necessarily me using it, right?
Sure.
That's the value of biometrics.
Yeah.
Biometrics connect the user to the identity, to the device,
right,
irrefutably.
Yeah, and the foundational principles are going to continue to be the foundational principles. I heard it described a long time ago, and I mean, we're talking when I first entered the ID world back in the mid '90s, that you have to have something that you have. There has to be something that you know, and there has to be something that you are. And that was the classic, you've got a token, whether that's a card or whether that's some other physical thing. The something that is a pen or an out of wallet question that theoretically only you will have possession of that knowledge, which we of course know that people lose control of that all the time. And then that something that you are, that's really where I think that the rubber meets the road. So much so that I can see, and this is just me saying this, where if you've got a really great biometric system in place that has the capability of proving liveness, and that it's not being duped by a counterfeit or an imitation or some kind of hijack where someone injects something into the process to try to spoof it. Biometrics become very important, and I like the fact that, and again, I'm a fan. I don't actually work myself. I don't actually work with biometrics. I work with people that work with biometrics, and so it's always fascinating to me, to hear about the different modes that people are using, and it certainly appears that there are a couple of mainstays that have been around a long time. Dare I say, they're kind of the old men of the biometric modes, and in my mind, that's facial identification or facial verification, and then finger imaging. And there are other things that are also out there. I know that there's been quite a bit of talk, especially in the banking sector, around iris recognition, which is again very interesting. They've apparently been doing some things with the vein patterns, in people that is showing some interesting promise. Our military friends and people inside of DoD have been doing gait biometrics for some time, which again is super important about, hey, the more information we can have about somebody before they're right up on us, especially in areas where there could be some kind of a security risk or a threat, I think is important. So if we were talking about, and you brought it up because I'd like to run with this, there was a tremendous amount of fraud. We will spend years trying to do a postmortem on all of the particulars on how we were exploited and what the exploits were in the last year. But it would appear to me, and I'm not trying to oversimplify the fix, but it would appear to me that if we had biometrics in play, that like the I don't want to say all of it, but the overwhelming majority, like 95% or higher, goes away, because you really do have a far better confidence that you're connected to the right, I call it the carbon-based life form, the right carbon-based life form, and not a look-alike or an imposter or just so I didn't know if you wanted to say a word or two about that.
Sure. Actually, you used a very specific word, and it is the appropriate word for biometric matching, and that is confidence.
Yes.
And I think it's important for people to understand the difference between what I call device authentication and user authentication. Device authentication uses a technology that is considered deterministic, meaning it's 100% wrong or 100% right. It's a yes or no binary answer. Is this the device that is allowed to connect to this other device?
Right.
And so a lot of people have a great deal of confidence in that because they know if it's rejected, it's rejected. If it's accepted, it's accepted, and they can just trust it, right? Biometrics and user authentication are different, though. They are what are considered probabilistic, right? We use statistical algorithms to determine the probability that I am who I say I am, right? And because of that probabilistic nature, people have less confidence in biometrics, and although that confidence has been improving over time because the research has been working, there's been a lot of companies putting out a lot of very good technology these days. So the whole idea here is to raise the probabilistic likelihood of the match determination, right, as close to 100% as we can, right? And we're never going to get 100%, but we can try and get as close as we can and reduce the odds that it's wrong, right? So the thing you have to understand about that is that it's about how much data you capture. The more data that you can capture, the higher potential probability that the match can find, right? The more data you use in the calculation, the higher potential match probability. And so some biometrics are more viable than others, and for a lot of different reasons, actually. If you think about how, we talked about how people interface, right? Well, people don't touch each other very often, except to prove that they're not carrying a gun or a knife, which is where handshaking came from, right? But we do look at each other, we listen to each other, and we talk to each other. So to me, the natural human interface to devices is going to follow the more natural human interface between people. That would mean face and voice, right?
Yeah, right.
I suspect that's where it's all going to end up. And there are advantages to that, and that those capabilities are already built into your device, right? We have cameras, we have microphones, we can do that. Most of these other ones require some type of special type of hardware that raises the price of the devices and makes it logistically more cumbersome and difficult to utilize. So to me, face and voice makes a lot of sense. Well, face recognition and face verification, face authentication, and at FaceTec we don't like to say face recognition because it has connotations to surveillance and Big Brother.
Right.
But the key is the amount of data that you can collect, then we need to use methods that collect more data than less. And guess what? There's more data in a three-dimensional representation of a face than a two-dimensional representation of that same face.
Sure.
And so that's why I really like FaceTec, is because FaceTec has managed to create a system that collects three-dimensional face data without having to use a special three-dimensional camera, right? It uses the onboard two-dimensional camera on the device. And because of really an invention or learning, about how two-dimensional cameras work with three-dimensional faces, FaceTec was able to determine how to make a three-dimensional representation of a face using two-dimensional images.
Right. Yeah.
And so FaceTec can collect a lot more data. The calculations can be the probability of a correct match is potentially much higher.
Right.
Some would argue orders of magnitude higher, right? And importantly, there's also an opportunity to use another issue. You talked about misrepresenting each other out there, and can we present something that isn't me? Can I spoof a system, right? So there's this concept called liveness. which has become extremely important over the last couple of years.
Sure.
It has been important forever, but nobody paid much attention to it until recently.
Yeah.
Well, high def cameras, AI, and high def screens can present an image to a two-dimensional camera that the onboard system thinks is a real person, right?
Right.
The resolution and the ability to cause that thing to move a certain way can fool an automated system. And so the liveness data that can be captured in a three-dimensional face is the same data that is used in the biometric matching, and that's critically important.
Right.
It makes liveness calculations a lot easier, a lot faster, and a lot more accurate. And we don't have to rely on external things like following the bouncing ball or whatever, right?
Yeah, and you know, just jumping in on that, so the principle that you're talking about, and I appreciate what you're saying about with your company, and you know, certainly, you know, you guys undoubtedly are leaders, you know, in your space and what you're doing, but those principles apply to the other modes of biometrics as well. The more data that you have, the better, and the need for you to know that you're dealing with a live representation of whatever that, in the case of a physiological presentation of, you know, some kind of an attribute, that's really key. And again, it to my mind brings up some really interesting questions on the behavioral, you know, side of, you know, how do you know that you're dealing with something, you know, live, you know, as far as the behavior biometrics go, and you know, don't want to necessarily go down that rabbit trail. But I think that for our viewers, and certainly in the context of the conversation, you know, this has been very helpful, you know, to sort of say, hey, if you've heard about the term and you don't really know what it is, we've done a really nice job of defining it, so, you know, people have a better, you know, understanding, and really, I don't think that we can stop having the conversation and reminding people that if you're not interested in connecting the person with the claim and understand that that really can only be accomplished through a biometric, then you are far from optimal. And I like what you said earlier, there is no perfect. But I mean, there's no perfect at all, in my opinion, in the ID world. The best that we can hope for is 99.9999999. You're not even close to that if you don't have good binding or you know, a good way of proving that the person is bound. So that is, you know, incredibly useful, and also I know that you know, we're kind of coming up to the end of our time that we had carved out for today. So but I do want to say this. Obviously, there is going to continue to be a keen interest in what's going on with biometrics. At SCY Studios, we are always looking for people to come back and, you know, to provide us, you know, with a view into their world and an update on the things that are, you know, kind of hot, that they're working on. And so I would officially like to extend that invitation to you. I hope that you will consider coming back and visiting us again. And also, you know, perhaps if you've got colleagues or teammates that you'd want to, you know, bring into the mix. I know that MDL and the future success that Mobile DL has is going to have a lot of biometrics in the mix. We just simply are not going to see MDL be, you know, massively successful on a global scale and not have biometrics play a really prominent role in all of that. But I wanted to sort of wrap things up, and we've created a tradition here at SCY Studios. You're our fifth guest, so you are now the fifth person that has been presented with this particular question. But Jay, if you were emperor for a day and you could do anything you possibly wanted to within the context of our conversation, because when I was asked this question,
Okay.
I immediately said, "Oh, that's easy. I would build a life-size Millennium Falcon." And it's like that's not where we're going with the question. What we're really asking, is in the context of talking about biometrics, and you could wave a magic wand or do whatever after being in the industry as long as you have, and we count your expertise in decades. What would you do if you could do any one thing?
Okay, well, I would not want me to be emperor for a day. I think that would be bad for everybody. The first thing I would do is make sure that my responses are less than a minute, because I know I can talk a lot. So I'd be happy to come back another day.
Okay.
If I had to make one decision regarding identity management and polling and biometrics, that one decision would be to authenticate a user, would be to bind a privilege to an actual legal identity, rather than to a device that we presume to trust as being held by the person that is that legal identity.
Right.
And this is where the industry's going. The sooner we can do this, the better. The only way you can do that is using the biometric. If you connect, because the privilege is really the person, right?
Sure.
I apply for a privilege, and as a person, a legal identity that government sponsors. The government is the arbiter of legal identity today. Those privileges that I get are attached to my identity. They're not attached to my phone. They're not attached to my laptop, right? So if I could change anything, it would be to attach a privilege to an identity and then authenticate the biometric to the identity. I would bind a biometric template or face map to the legal identity, and then every time somebody tries to access that privilege that's associated with that identity, I would force them to authenticate to the biometric that's attached to the legal identity, that's bound to it. And that way we know exactly who is trying to access the privilege, and we don't have to trust the connection between the phone and the user.
Right.
Make sense?
It does, and that's a fantastic answer. Not as good as a Millennium Falcon, but it is still a good answer. Well, listen, Jay, thank you so much for stopping by and taking time to visit with us, and we certainly we look forward to you coming back and visiting us again soon. And I also want to say thank you to the viewers out there, and for the folks that take time out of their day to kind of check out SCY Studios. Please come back and visit us. We have many wonderful episodes in the queue with topics of relevance to ID security in the coming days. But for now, I just want to say thank you for your time, and hope that you have a great day.